Speaking of, the love-hate relationship that many of us feel with our smartphones is increasingly tipping further towards hate than love. As data breaches and privacy scandals now consistently reverberate through our society, new figures are showing many Australians want to cut back on their phone use, but just can't.
Yeah, for tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Shivani Gopal, the CEO of The Remarkable Woman, and Tim Harcourt, the airport economist, who was with us a little earlier in this show as well. So as Brooke was just saying, this love-hate relationship with smartphones, it's kind of reaching a really loud note at the moment. 39% of Australians say that they use their phone too much. Yeah. And then really concerningly, 34% of Australians are trying to limit their mobile phone use, but can't, which I think is kind of terrifying. Shivani, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, it's really reaching saturation point, isn't it? And the interesting thing about the love-hate relationship with smartphones is it's a double-edged sword. So in the world that we live in, we can't get by without it. Imagine, doing business with someone and them saying, "Oh no, I don't have a smartphone, so I couldn't respond to that email until 8 hours later, and when I got back." So it just doesn't work in the world that we have today. And smartphones, let's face it, it has made us faster in the way that we do business, far more productive, and has given us more information than ever. So in that way, it works really well. But the other side of the sword is it actually makes us less productive too, because it means that people go into the zombie-like state of the never-ending scroll. And I know that everyone, including myself, we're guilty of it. We're doing some work and all of a sudden we're scrolling again. I mean, how does this stuff happen? And then you've got the, the conflict around relationships as well, and how smartphones take away from relationships, because a smartphone will give you everything from information, but it's also the place where people go to seek solace and comfort, right? And so as a result, this isn't happening. Conversation isn't happening. So let's, forecast to 20, 50 years down the track, we're going to have a huge deficit of emotional intelligence because of it. So I think we've got to play this one really smart, to use the same word.
The good thing is, I think with surveys like this, we're actually all starting to really think about the way it's changing our behaviour. Initially, we just got smartphones, we're all jumped on board. Oh, it's so convenient, look at this, we can do work from home, we can be on the train and we can watch a movie. But now we're starting to say, hang on, how is this actually changing behaviour?
It's really love when it begins, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because it's so amazing all the things you can do. And I think it's an interesting point. You can see the technological age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics. For the reasons you mentioned, because smartphones are great when I want to call you, but also means you can call me.
Yeah.
And so, for something like the Airport Economist TV show, everyone watches it on their smartphone and they look up China or Brazil or whatever episode it is. So it's fantastic for distribution, but then with interaction, that's quite different. And I mean, I agree in the sense that people need the self-discipline to know when to use it, when to have breaks from it. In the same way, any technological thing like television or telephones, you've got to be a little bit self-disciplined in how you use it. Otherwise, you'll get adverse effects on productivity.
Yeah, and I think that smartphones can do so much more than just streaming your sport, streaming, a video, or using your social media. And I think workplaces need to get more aware of how to better utilise smartphones, because again, you can't get your people off it. You may as well understand how to get people onto it on a more effective manner. So I would encourage workplaces to look into things like project management apps like Slack, for example, Evernote, and Google Docs. I mean, I was reading about this, this university class who actually did all their notes, their lecture notes, on the same Google Doc. And so if there was any questions, it was answered immediately. And you had this building, working document that was so robust from everybody else's synthesis of what was being, discussed. So I think, technology and smartphones can be incredibly powerful. You've just got to start thinking about how to use it for its, improvement rather than just the convenience part.
And it's one thing about information. I mean, it used to be that we had a shortage or we didn't have enough information, so we were always hungry for it. Now we almost have too much. So now I think there's a great role for educators and service providers to provide a synthesis of the guts of real issues rather than throwing everything at it. Something that your money does very well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We try our best. Thank you.
Before we do move on from that topic, I do think it's interesting that it seems to be this feeling across the age spectrum as well. It's not that just older people are looking at younger people and going, get off your phone, I'm sick of this. Because there was an interesting article in Harper's Magazine which said that 57% of US teenagers are trying to cut back, which is more than the Australian number, and that's teenagers. And then 62% of UK teens say that they wouldn't have cared if social media had never been invented. I mean, from teenagers, I was fascinated by that.
Oh, so they could do without it, basically.
They could do without it. I mean, they've never grown up in a situation without it, but they said, you know, I don't care for it.
Well, my daughter asked me what smartphone I had as a kid, and I said I had a go-kart and a cricket bat. She was shocked. She was shocked.
Yeah.
You were utilising other, other muscles in the body rather than just the brain and the thumb.
Necessarily, though.
No, not the way I played.
Thinking to add to productivity, go-karts and cricket bats.
Oh, there was the rope on the tyre across the creek too. That's a whole other story.
Of course.
So to your point, Chris, funnily enough, that doesn't surprise me, because the higher amount of time you spend on social media, and so the stats that you're referring to are the younger demographic, and so they use their smartphones primarily for social media, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. The more time you spend on it, the higher rates of depression and anxiety that you experience, because you are comparing your day-to-day life, and when you're on your smartphone, you're probably in your tracky dacks and so forth, and you're comparing that everyday life to someone else's highlight reel where they're looking absolutely immaculate, and you sort of go, well, that doesn't really, reflect how I feel about myself right now. So it makes sense that teenagers are trying to strip themselves away from it, because a part of their conscious mind is going, hang on a second, this isn't healthy for me, and I'd like to get off it, but only if everyone else did, because you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right?
Because all your friends are saying, here I am in Paris, in Bangkok, in Vladivostok, you know?
Or like Tim Harcourt, here I am in Buenos Aires this week. Now, Tim, a startup founder who's raised $10 million, has a rule that he's established to weed out job candidates who he feels just look a little too good to be true, look and sound a bit too good to be true. He says when he actually goes into an interview situation, he wants to hear about some kind of failure, past failure in business, in order to get them hired. If they can't seem to name anything bad that they've done, then he says he wouldn't hire them, because he wants to basically know that they haven't got everything in life right. What do you think of that?
Well, you wouldn't hire the captain of the Titanic again, would you? But I mean, but honestly, one of my mentors said to me, he's never had enough failures to be a true success. So I think to some extent you do learn from these ups and downs, and some of our greatest prime ministers had difficult times. Menzies, Howard, Bob Hawke, they all had ups and downs and ended up, it's getting over at Churchill, in the UK, getting over these hurdles and coming back shows resilience. It's funny, we were talking just before about, in the article, the boss said something about you don't want to beat the boss at video games. Yeah. I was struck by that. Is that what they really think in interviews?
and do you really want to be talking about your success rate at video games in an interview? That's saying a lot about your capabilities, right?
How candid do you really want to be, though? Yeah. You're in a situation you are still trying to ultimately impress someone. I don't think it's a very difficult balance. Does every employee want to know about the failures, or do you risk really?
See, I think if you're really serious about hiring the right candidate, and if you're serious about doing the interview for the outcome as opposed to the interview itself, because sometimes you will get a resume that just blows you away, and there's a part of you that goes, I just want this candidate to succeed. So you've got to really step outside of that and think the outcome is, I don't want this candidate to succeed in this interview, I need the company to succeed with this candidate. And the only way you can do that is by having someone who has a strong level of clarity, self-reflection, and understands a lot about grit. So we know that the statement, or if you don't, you're going to know it now, the path of success is paved on the road of failure, right, or some derivative of that. What I would say is the path to grit is paved through failures. And so someone who has failed time and time again will show a higher level of grit. Someone who hasn't ever failed, first of all, I would challenge if they're human. And second of all, if they truly haven't, then they are more likely to suffer from an imposter syndrome of perfection, and as a result of that, not want to be found out when they do fail in the organisation, and be more likely to cover it up, because they don't want to give up the ghost of the perception of me being perfect. So there's that. But from an interview perspective, it is so imperative that you not just ask about failures, but you ask them about the story. You say, tell me about your greatest failure. Follow up with some probing. What did you learn from that? What did you change as a result? How has that made you different in your decision-making skills? Because I think that tells you so much about the person's ability to think critically and how they're going to succeed as a result. Because your failures will do so much more for your successes than not learning from it. So it's an important question, and one that should really be asked.
So it's a good question as a journo to put to a newly appointed governor of the Reserve Bank or something. You always ask them, is there any major policy decision that you've changed your mind on?
Oh, yeah.
And you see, and if they say no, then they think they know everything. But if they say yes, you ask them what it is.
Yes.
And then they've got to admit it, and then you've got a headline. So it's really good for a journo, isn't it? You know?
That's a good one for
I asked Glenn
journos.
Stevens that when he became governor. I said, anything you changed your mind on?
What did he say?
He said the current account. He said it was it barked but never bit. And the headline the next day, you know, in the paper was, you know, Governor admits, you know. Anyway, he loved me for that.
That was one of Tim's successes. Well, what's one of your failures?
Oh, where do I start?
Oh, yeah.
Where do I start? Well, a good example is that I always thought that you should wait to write something really perfectly before you published it. And then I realised everyone's got a bad book in them. So you get your first book out and it can be imperfect, but you've still got a book out.
Yep.
And you'll get another one and then another one.
Yep.
So it's probably better, you know, the rule of second best, you know. You can't get 100% perfect, but if you get something out that's pretty good, you'll improve upon it.
Yeah.
That's my publishing sort of rule.
Fantastic. Now, Australia's first airport designed exclusively for low-cost carriers has opened today in Avalon. But it's interesting, this is somewhat of a global phenomenon where we've had budget airlines right before, but we seem to have these amazing, you know, glitzy kind of airport offerings, which maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. This is the next kind of potential for disruption. Are you seeing some of these low-cost airports and terminals popping up in the places where you're
asking
travel?
me. You're asking me. Well,
first-class economist.
Yeah. Well, look, people do ask me about the economy, and I say I don't know. I always travel business class, but let me tell you this. You know, I've been on some airlines where you see so many tattoos and thongs, and that's just in the lounge.
Yep.
You know, so there's clearly product differentiation, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, business travellers have got to go at a certain time; they've got to not muck around. But if you've got a bit more leisure, you can go at any time of the day. Then you know you'll take advantage of it. And Avalon is a good regional airport for if you're from Geelong.
Yeah, they're saying that airports can be basically like warehouses, low ceilings, no, you know, few windows, few decorations, less staff, just really no frills through and through. What do you think, Shivani? Is this the future?
Well, we've all been to them, haven't we, where we sort of get off an airplane and we go, oh, what, we've got to walk off the plane ourselves and, you know, walk all this way and, you know, be careful not to be run over by an airplane along the way and, you know. And so, yes, it is possible. I think that there will be, you know, a commercial aspect to it around it. So if the airport costs the airline less, then in return the ticket will be less. And so the ripple effect of that will be there will be a good price point for people. And for those who, you know, just as people, you know, will choose to carry on their luggage and roll things up in a perfect little ball and fly Tiger, for example, you know, at the expense of maybe having a flight delayed, and they still choose to do that, there'll be people. Oh goodness, I've just said that, and you know, maybe Tiger's okay.
They're not your sponsor,
no
I
offence
hope.
to Tiger.
Get it.
But
all the Tiger people out there.
Yeah, so there'll be a price point for it, and I think if people are prepared for the fact that there'll be, you know, the inconvenience of logistics, and meaning the airport's probably going to be further out to the CBD, for example, there's going to be 2 or 3 buses to catch.
Yep.
I think if people are prepared to do that for the price point, then it certainly works.
You might even have to pay to go to the toilet because that would be an extra, apparently. It's just an idea, but
right?
Don't go there, Brooke.
what do you think, viewers? Do you want to go in and out as cheaply and as quickly as possible? Maybe there's an idea there. Thanks, guys. Tim
you.
and Shivani, as always.
Thank you.